I want to talk about Donovan Mitchell to start today's podcast. Maybe we thought we were going to be a little bit further along. Mitchell had some tweets. It kind of felt like there was some momentum picking up last week that Mitchell was going to be with the Knicks. On the Utah side of this, none of this is surprising. You know, whether it was Bill and I talking sometimes on this podcast, just in the way when you're checking in and you're asking a team like, hey, what do you think about this draft pick? Or, hey, what'd you think about that trade or whatever? Whenever you brought up names of who the next pissed off star is going to be, Mitchell was always at the top of the list. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case here. This isn't the demands that we've seen from other players. It just isn't. But it's a pretty telling thing that I would say for a couple of years, like, who do you think the next guy could be that decides that he wants out? And Mitchell was always brought up. I don't know if that's a Utah thing. I think the Jazz and the new ownership have tried to do a lot of things to make Mitchell feel like he's the guy. You know, I've heard it described as like there's certain players who you have to kiss their ass. You have to give them the keys to the franchise and do everything you possibly can for them. And I think Utah has even tried to do some of those things, but is Mitchell in that tier? And that's what I always think is kind of interesting about where this goes, because I've said it too many times, but it's worth repeating once again. The job of a GM is to have your team positioned for the next guy that's mad. And unfortunately, for a lot of markets, even for the next guy that's mad, he's just not going to want to go there. And Utah is one of those markets, which is a massive disadvantage. It's a disadvantage for too many teams in the league, but that's just the reality of what it is. And the Knicks thing was always some connected deal where, you know, Leon Rose comes in, CAA guy. You know, Mitchell's represented by Austin Brown, who's terrific. Everybody raves about him. There was a Kentucky, Louisville connection there on the staff where you kind of wondered, you know, some of these franchises that would give the keys to running it, thinking this is about relationships. Like, how often has that actually really paid off? Well, it hasn't paid off enough to make you think this is the only way to build your team, with agents running the teams and different people with different connections. But it's kind of about giving yourself maybe a chance. And whether it was Karl Anthony Towns that was brought up in the past, or Devin Booker before Chris Paul got there, Mitchell was always somebody that you thought, like, I could see him probably wanting to bounce at some point. So I don't think it's a secret that he would maybe like to play somewhere else. And I also don't think it's too much of a secret that if Ainge is moving Gobert for draft picks, and then you bring back Conley, Bogdanovich, and Mitchell, like, do you have enough there to even be out of the play-in group? Do you have enough there in a stacked West to be a top six? You don't. You likely don't. And then it's like, cool, we made it in the play-in game, and then what, right? And they haven't even been successful, and they've had some pretty good basketball teams over the last couple of years. Not so much this year, really going back to 2 years ago, right? So whenever somebody like Mitchell is available, because you know, the moving target of which players think, hey, I'm worthy enough to decide that I need to go somewhere else because it's not working here. You know, it's felt like that move is reserved for the top group of the NBA. And Mitchell's really good. Okay, he is really good. I am a fan. I feel like I've defended him for most of his career against some other players. I'll get to some of the things that are a little bit concerning later on. But if the Knicks were to grab Donovan Mitchell, that's a good thing. All right. Like, if I had one sentence on this, I am for the Knicks getting Donovan Mitchell. I don't know what the price will be, but we all know how this works. Now, I think not just in basketball, not specific to this trade, but the way these things are talked about, I think there's a lot of us walking around that like to offer up problems for not even solutions, just things that are presented, right? Because what I've heard, and what you will hear if Mitchell were to end up on the Knicks, or maybe, you know, I don't know if something else could happen here, but it would be immediately met with, well, you're going to win a championship with Donovan Mitchell? And the answer is no. The answer is no. All right? There's no guarantees whatsoever. But I've always felt like as you get a little bit older and you'll talk to people like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm thinking about doing this. There's too many people that their first instinct is to think of why the thing that you're talking about won't work. And there's still a really good chance. Like, it's the easiest thing in the world to do. Like, again, if we stay with basketball, when I've seen debate shows talk about players and say the one guy really likes the player and the other guy isn't as high on the player, the other guy is always going to win the argument by countering by saying, does that player guarantee you a championship? Think about what you're asking. Like, that means the guy defending the player has to say, yes, I am guaranteeing a championship. Winning is fucking hard. It is really, really hard. So if the criteria for any transaction is that it has to win a championship, then the guy that calls it out gets to win the arguments all the time, because it's a really easy argument to make and the odds are always in your favor. Something that's similar, but not nearly as important, but kind of similar. I remember when I first got started, I was an insurance consultant, which in itself is a hilarious story. Didn't last that long with that. Was not my fault. The company was breaking the law by letting me be a consultant because I had never actually sold health insurance. And it's a shocking little thing. The state of Vermont wanted people who were insurance consultants to actually have at one point worked in insurance. I actually think that checks out. But yeah, it didn't work out. So the guy that I was going to work for was asking me about my deal because it was a good enough question. He was like, what's your deal? You bartending, but you went to a good school and you graduated a couple of years ago, but you're still sort of hanging out. Like, what did you do? I was like, well, I did do an internship at this TV station. I don't know if I'd want to be on the air, maybe work for a team or something like that. He's like, well, there's no money in that. Like his first instinct was to tell me why the thing that I was thinking about doing was a stupid idea because there's no money in it. And by the way, like the general part of that is, okay, yeah, you're probably right. I did say to him, not if you're awesome. And he was like, what? Like that was my counter. I was like, well, not if there's money in it if you're awesome at doing it. So I don't like a lot of the TBD conversations that will happen with Mitchell because this isn't about guaranteeing a title for the Knicks. You're the Knicks. Like I know what the brand is supposed to be. I know what the city, but I think Knicks fans know like this has actually been a comically bad run for a team that's supposedly a storied franchise. And all it guarantees you it just makes you better. And that's kind of the point. Like, I'll never forget one time working with Bob Ryen, who's joining us later. We were doing some debate show, Comcast, after a Celtics game, and there was a trade rumor. I don't even remember who the player was. And they were asking us if the Celtics should trade for this player. And the host was like, is it a championship move, though? Is this a championship move? And Bob Ryan's like, championships? Like, win more than 45 games. It was a down period for the Celtics at that time. And it was a great point. He's like, I'm not looking at anything with the standard of does this trade mean that it's going to be a championship? I'm just like, hey, are you guys going to be better? And the Knicks would be better. Again, depending on what happens, do they get to keep Barrett? I think Barrett improves. Barrett's somebody I really liked this past season. And the other thing, NBA players are not like Russillo. They don't like to be alone, right? They don't like to do this by themselves. So if you add Mitchell and then maybe another guy decides, hey, I'll go there. Now you have a place at the table. And that's really what all of this stuff is, whether it's tanking and hoping. It doesn't guarantee you anything. It gives you a chance. It gives you a chance at something, right? If the Utah Jazz end up tanking, which is probably what they should do, especially with somebody like Wembanyama who's coming out, which, by the way, an aside, I cannot wait for the story that is written. If Utah were like a disastrous record this year and the Wembanyama stuff were happening, someone will write, well, they did have a French center and it worked out really well and he made a ton of money and it's completely irrelevant. Be like Victor's going, I was on the fence about this Utah thing, but the Gobert deal really worked out. It has nothing to do with it. But someone will write that. All right. Mini rant over off of that. Pivoting back to the Knicks. Mitchell's going to be 26 in September. All right. He's a borderline third team All NBA player. He can shoot the ball, 36% from three. He gets to the free throw line, makes his free throws. It gives you about 5 assists. But the more important thing, the thing I can never get off of him while I defend Mitchell, he's 28 points per game in 39 career playoff games. That's 4th active right now. All right. Only behind Luka, KD, and LeBron. That first round series against Denver in 2020, he went for 57, 30, 20, 51, 30, 44, and 22 in that series. In the 2021 2-0 lead that they blew to the Clippers once they went small and just worked Gobert, Gobert couldn't do anything back to a Clippers small lineup defending him. He scored 45, 37, 30, 37, 21, and 39. He can go. And I love those guys. Now, the concerning part is what happened with you defensively? You're not the tallest guy, but you're stout and you get a 6'10 wingspan and you're not old. Are you bored? Are you not competitive enough? Because there's no other part of your game that tells me that you're not competitive. But why did the defense look so bad against Dallas in this past playoff series? And it did. It looked like it kind of gave up a little bit, which is concerning. I would say there's also times where he forces the issue a little bit. I've called it Westbrook-ish, Westbrook light, which is also a little concerning. But he's still young enough and still dynamic enough and a true number one get me buckets playoff scorer, like a real one. All right. Not, I need something else to happen. I need there to be spacing. I need other shooters around me. No, like he kind of can do it on his own, which can lead to those times where he's also forcing it too, which that's that fine line of figuring out how to be as a player. But turning 26 this fall and being on a new team, like I'm all for this kind of transaction, which I know guarantees nothing. One little addition to this. Does it feel like it's a little bit like Melo coming home? Remember that? Melo finally gets the Knicks, tells the Nets, if you trade for me, I'm not signing. Gets the Knicks to, which is always kind of a weird debate. Like what was better, LeBron just leaving in free agency or Melo demanding a trade the whole time and then also demanding a trade where the Knicks had to give up probably a lot more than they would have, or they could have just waited a free agency. I mean, it's just kind of a funny historical thing to kind of go back and look at. Was it better that Melo's like, I'm not staying here, so you might as well get something for me? And the LeBron thing, the public just didn't know how to process all that stuff 12 years ago. And now the desensitization of the entire thing, I don't know if that's the word, but to be desensitized to players demanding out, like nobody really cares about it anymore. And fucking LeBron just left a free agent and people lost their minds. But I do wonder, Melo got to the Knicks at 26, the coming home deal. It was a big deal. The problem is nobody came with him. Amari had one good season left in him and he was done. They got Baron Davis's last season of his career out of him. The Jeremy Lin run where Melo was like, yeah, I don't know that we're running our offense through this guy. You had a fun couple of weeks. I'd like the ball back. J.R. Smith was in there at one point, second leading scorer. They won one playoff series with Melo the entire time he was with the Knicks. And I defend Melo because I think most of the time when you look at who they lost to throughout, whether it was Denver or the Knicks, they usually lost to better basketball teams. You know, people knock Melo for his playoff record. I'm like, look at who they played. Like, how many times were they supposed to win that series? I think there's one in there that's a little disappointing, but most of the time he always lost to a better team. But nobody actually went to go with him. That was the part. But like I said, there are no guarantees. I'm not guaranteeing that the Knicks win. I'm not guaranteeing that the next superstar says, hey, I want to play with Donovan Mitchell. But it gives you a much better chance of what your current roster is.